Most of you know that this is actually my first time actually to speak as a staff pastor, which is kind of cool. And the lights are much better now. I feel much better. I thought I was speaking in the dark, but anyway, it's just interesting sometimes. When Jason asked me to preach, to teach, my first words are always yes. I love to do that, and it's like, great. What are we doing? And I'm really excited and. Because I'm excited. It's selfish, I can be honest, because I like to look, when he asks me to teach, then I get to have a portion of Scripture that I get to look into a lot deeper, and God usually speaks to me during that time, and so it's better even than my devotions that I do. It's just this extra time spent with God and in His Word, and so I love that. And then I asked Pastor Jason, I said, well, what do you want me to preach on? And he told me, and I was like, really? Really? And the reason I say that is because I've already done that sermon once, right? I mean, maybe even twice. I learned it in Sunday school, and it's old, it's boring, there's nothing new. And these are the thoughts that are going through the back of my mind. And I probably shouldn't say that because he'll never ask me to preach again, but whatever. But that's what's happening, and and so you have to understand that I grew up in church, right? Literally. And even with all of that, I did have a drug problem while I was in church, actually. My parents drugged me Sunday morning. They drugged me Sunday night. They drugged me Wednesday. They drugged me Saturday. It was awful. I was drugged to church all the time. Never knew. I just grew up there in the church. In fact, there are times when people see me now and they think, wow, you're still in church? I'm surprised, This is the kid who... Actually, when I was like 10 years old, I was up front and smarting off, and my dad came up, and there was a long story to all of this, but my dad came up and picks me up, 10 years old, stands me just out of the seat, sets me down in the middle of the aisle, whacks me, back when we could do that, twice, and then points to the back of the church, and I sat with my parents till I was 18. I never moved again. That was never going to happen, right? So, grew up, I was disciplined. Everything happened in the church for me, and so the story, I was kind of reluctant, right? And then God checked me and said, hey, there might be something new for you in this. And so that's my challenge for you for those of you who grew up in the church, just take a moment and maybe put aside everything else you've heard about the story of the young paraplegic by the pool of Bethesda. Set aside all of that and look at it with a clean slate and see if there might be something that God would have for you today. Please don't let the fact that maybe you already know it all miss the moment of what God has to say to you today. Is that okay? Can we do that? I had to do it. Now it's on you. So let's look at John. It's in John chapter 5, is there anybody here who's never heard this story before? No. See, you've all heard it. That's good. So we're all in the same boat. So or in the same building, I guess. But anyway, let's do the healing of the pool there. John chapter 5, verse 1. It says, sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by five covered colonnades. There a number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a very long time, he said, the question for today, do you want to be healed? Sir, the invalid said, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred, and while I'm trying to get in, someone else always gets in ahead of me. And then Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. And at once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was the Sabbath, and so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, it is the Sabbath, and the law forbids you to carry your mat. What the heck? Anyway, but he replied, the man who made me well said, pick up your mat and walk. So, what do? It seems like the question, right, we're going to say is, do you want to be healed? That's today's service, right? Is do you want to be healed? And so, there is something to be said, and when you look at the questions Jesus asked, right, he did nothing by chance. Everything has a purpose. And so, that question was not just for the man by the pool. That is a question for us today, is do we want to be healed, all right? So let's go to the story, and let's look at this a little bit. This story actually starts early in the morning of that day, probably. This paraplegic guy had a plan. He didn't just walk to the pool, right? I mean, he can't use his arms and his legs, thus the definition of a paraplegic, right? Unless I'm wrong, he couldn't get there on his own, right? Let alone lay out his bed and then get on top of that. These are things he could not do. So he had to have a plan and some friends, some kind of influence on somebody to get him to that pool, right? And so he's there by the pool, and if you know the story, legend or story has it that pool would get stirred by the angel of God or maybe by an underground geyser, some sort of thing. But then whoever got into that pool may or may not get a chance to get healed, but you had to be first and all that other stuff. But this guy had a plan, and he was doing in his mind what was the right thing. This was the only way he was going to be healed. So he made sure that somehow somebody got him to that pool just in case maybe he would be healed, right? And then Jesus comes, and he's headed in. It doesn't matter what ceremony it is. It obviously even says that right there. That it was just a celebration. He was headed to the temple, and on the way there, he detours around to this pool of Bethesda, right? Jesus does nothing by accident, right? And so he detours around, and he heads to this place where the people are messy, right? I mean, think about it. These are the outcasts. These are the lame and the paralyzed and the blind. These are the people we don't want to associate with, right? They're the guys on what used to be called Skid Row. They live underneath the overpasses in the big cities. They're homeless. All of these people would be considered that. These people had physical ailments also. That's why they were by the pool. But the fact of the matter is you could categorize them into the people we don't want to hang around with. That's just who they are, all right? And life is messy. I've told Pastor Jason this many times, is that he's a much better pastor than I am all the way across because I don't like people. He likes people. I don't like people. I'm trying to get over that, so bear with me as I work through that. But, people are messy, right? When you get to know people, it's like, man, that's too much information. I didn't want to know that. I kind of liked the Vinny I saw before I got to know him, I mean, yeah, right, Vinny? And he liked me better before he got to know me too, especially now. But anyway, the point is that people are messy, right? And there are people that we avoid. Right? You go to a company event, and there's those group of guys that you just don't, I just don't want to deal with that, right? Or you go to an event, a sporting event or a concert or something, and there's this group of people hanging around, and you can tell how they are. The smoke inhales their heads and whatever, and you just don't want to mess around with those people, right? It's not a halo, not from God. It's from whatever wacky weed there. Anyway, but you don't want to hang around with those people, right? I mean, think about it. And so we avoid them because people are messy. And Jesus steps into the mess, right? He goes right to this guy, and he singles out this one young man. I have no idea as to why. Maybe just so John could remember because the story is pretty awesome, right? 38 years, walks up to this guy, and he says the obvious question that we think, is do you want to be healed, right? Now, why would he be at the pool? I mean, he could have just, wherever it is he stays, he could have just stayed there, but obviously he wants to be healed. He's by the pool. So why does Jesus ask this obvious question? It seems to me like there might be more to that question than just, do you want to be healed? But let's just look at this young man. Perhaps Jesus is saying to him, have you counted the cost of being healed? Because if I heal you, you've got to move out of your parents' basement, right? I mean, you got to get a job, you're going to have to get married, and then before married, then you got to start dating, and you got to find somebody, and all this other stuff, and then you're going to get married, and then you're going to have kids, and then they're going to start dating, and then life is over as you know it, and then, do you really want to be healed? You're much better off by the pool, right? I mean, let's all go back to those days, right? Or maybe he's thinking, this is my thought, is like, why is that guy by the edge of the pool? How close is he? What if somebody drop kicks him into the pool and he doesn't get healed? His name is now Bob, right? I mean, a guy with no arms, no legs. What's he going to do? I mean, think about that. Does he really want to be? Why is he there, right? Because he wants to be healed. But he has an excuse, right? And he says, nobody will help me. In other words, if that happens, I don't have anybody to get me in that pool, whatever. He makes excuses. We all make excuses, right? So the first question is, do you want to be healed, right? Have you counted the cost? Because I guarantee you that there is something in your life that you're dealing with that God would love to take away. God would love to take that away and take that burden off of you. There is something that is paralyzing you in your Christian walk. But the question is, do you want to be healed? You're doing the right things, right? That's the first step, is to do the right things, right? You're doing the right things, but things aren't happening, okay? As I said before, I grew up in the church, and when I got to think it was 5th grade. It may have been 6th. Probably Craig and Penny will remember these. There were these movies called The Sound of Distant Thunder, Thief in the Night. Do you remember those, Craig? Anybody else remember those movies? Yeah, they gave me nightmares. I was scared spitless. If you don't know what they are, they're based on the book of Revelation and somebody's interpretation of the last days, the trials and tribulations. And so basically, to a 5th grader, here's what I got. It was if I didn't get my life figured out, God was going to come, and he was going to take all the good people away, and the rest of us were going to have to run for our lives so that we didn't get our heads chopped off. I mean, that's what the movie, it was awful. I was scared spitless. It's about this guy that doesn't make it, and yet he doesn't want to follow the Antichrist, that's a whole other revelation, and Jason can preach on that later. But he doesn't want to follow that, and so he tries to hide out, and he gets together with these other people that know that they messed up, and they didn't follow Christ like they should have, and so they try to do it, but the Holy Spirit isn't here, and so they're all on their own, and they're all scared, and they don't know what to do, and, slowly they get picked off by the Antichrist and his group, and they slowly get taken to the guillotines, and their heads are rolling, and I don't want to be that guy, right? And I'm 5th grade, scared spitless, right? And going to church, wearing myself out, going to the altar all the time, and speed up a couple years. I'm still having nightmares off and on about this, still concerned. And coming home, we lived in the country, and it was about, I'd say 10 or 12 miles to school, but the way the bus worked, it took about an hour for us to get home, and they would pick us up. I think we were the second on the bus, which meant we were the second to the last off, right? That's the way it worked. And my brother and my sister rode the bus with me, but they were in high school, and this time I was in junior high, and so the bus would come by, pick me up, and then it would go and pick them up. And I got to be honest, I was the little guy, and so I didn't really even pay attention to my brother and sister until later, because I had my friends, right? So this is before I got my assigned seat and got in trouble. I would go to the back of the bus and tell stories. I mean, it was cool. We had this little game we would play where they would give us like a car and a sport and this other thing, and then we would make up these stories. We basically lied and fibbed. But we had a good time, right? And making up these stories and stuff. And so I'm in the back of the bus making up these stories, having a great time. And the bus drive goes on. It takes about 45 minutes until everybody is gone except the last 2 stops, which is mine and our neighbors, the Kaufmans. And I look around, and the only people on the bus is me and the Kaufmans. My brother and sister are not there. This is a new thing for me. This has never happened. And I'm a little scared, right? And, of course, where do I rush to? I didn't think, well, maybe Mom picked him up and Mom forgot to get me. Oh, no, I didn't think, oh, my brother has a sports thing and my sister's at interviewing for college. Oh, no, I didn't think that. No, I knew what happened. The guillotine was coming, I was scared spitless. I was. Don't laugh. It'll happen to you someday. I hope not. But so I got off the bus, right, and I ran into the house, down the driveway, into the house, didn't even look in the garage for my mom's car, ran into the house, and my mom is not home. Now, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. She did not stay at home. She was not there. I was a little concerned. I was very concerned, and so I started to cry. I'm 8th grade, bawling my head off. I'm crying, so I picked up the phone. For those of you who don't know, they had dial phones then, right? And so I dialed the number to my dad's office, and the secretary answered. This was not help, because she had an affair with this other guy, and my parents shared these kind of things so that we could pray for them, And so we were praying for this lady to find Jesus. She obviously didn't find him because she's still here, right? And then she says this. I said, is my dad there, And I am bawling, blubbering. And she says, he was here just a minute ago, and we don't know where he went. I'm like, slam the phone down. It's a true story. I am crying my eyes out. I am so scared to death. So I called my neighbor, because she's our Sunday school teacher, right? I called her. Guess who wasn't home? It just rang and rang and rang. And now I'm just petrified. I don't know what to do. And so I do the last best thing that I could do. I called my pastor. I figured, if he's gone, I'm history, right? So I dialed the phone, and it rang, and it rang, and it rang. And about on the 20th ring, I heard the car pull into the driveway. my mom had forgot to pick me up at school, I was scared, right? I just knew I'd been left behind. And the reason for that is the next point. It's because I spent all my time accepting the grace of God, but not trying to build a relationship with the person who gave me the grace. If you look at this story, you'll see that this man, after Jesus heals him, he goes to the church, right? He goes to the temple, right? And while he's there, I'm assuming he's going because he's Jewish and he's praising God for this new thing, but they ask him, who did this? And he doesn't know. He was more concerned with accepting the grace of God and that forgiveness and that healing that he gave him than he was in building a relationship with Jesus Christ. That's where I was, and I'm afraid that a lot of us are in that same boat today, right? We're more than willing to accept the fact that Jesus forgives us our sins, and it doesn't make it any less, but we're not seeking that relationship with Jesus Christ, right? We're just doing the right things, accepting the grace, but maybe we're missing that time with the Lord. Maybe we need to add a personal Bible study time, a personal prayer time, something away from everything else to where you can just have, I don't care, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it takes to build that relationship. Imagine where those of us who are married would be if we didn't have time to build a relationship with your wife or your husband, right? It would be you'd be in the same boat, right? When they didn't show up from work, you'd be worried, right? And what's going on? Because you didn't have a relationship and you didn't know, right? So, point number 2, build a relationship with Jesus Christ. I think that's probably, of all of them, that's the one that strikes home to me the most, because a lot of times as we get busy in the church doing the right things, we sacrifice that time with God that is our personal time. If there's anything that gets pushed aside, that usually is the first thing to go. I'll go to the men's Bible study. I go to 2 of them, right? I'll go to both of those. I'll do all these other things. I'll even study for the sermon sometimes and forsake, and then this is just me being honest, but I'll forsake that personal time and that building of that relationship. And then I got to come back to God and say, I'm so sorry, right? I didn't mean to do that. I didn't even realize. I got all caught up. Help me slow down. And he always does. He always takes me back. But so the third point is an interesting one because it speaks to me too. And I went back to, I told you I don't like people, because they're messy and all that other stuff. And I have found in my life that God usually calls you to do things that you can't. Something that was never on the horizon, right? I mean, this man, perfect example, he's a paraplegic, and what does God tell him to do? Get up. Like, get up. Yeah, how am I going to do that? That was not on his mind. His mind was to get in the pool, right? I mean, but God told him to get up, and then he adds, pick up your mat. Okay, this guy hadn't stood on his legs for 38 years, right? And yet, he stands up, and then bending over, that takes other muscles he hasn't used in 38 years, and then his arms, he's got these guns, right? He rolls over, and he picks up that mat, and then God tells him to walk. He hasn't walked in 38 years. His sense of balance, all of that came back all at once. Every muscle tightened up. Everything worked. If anybody knows anything about being out of shape, which a lot of us are, round is a shape, though, right? So that's okay, but, if you know anything about being out of shape, getting those muscles back into shape so that you can do the things you used to be able to do is not an easy task, and yet it happened in an instant. But God asked him to do those things, right? These are things he could not do. I guarantee you he hadn't thought about that when he took off that morning, that he would actually get up, pick up his mat, and walk, right? Be prepared when God asks you, do you want to be healed? The next step, he's going to ask you to do something you've never thought about doing before, right? And then, as we move through this, there's a point that I think we all reach in our lives where, we're going to church, we're in a Bible study, maybe we're even in a life group, and we're sucking that stuff in, not giving much out though, right? And we're making the same mistakes we've made before, or maybe we're even making new ones along with the old ones, and we've kind of hit a wall, right? And we feel like this is it, and it could be so many different things too, right? In my life, that's where it was for me. All these right things, but yet I've hit a wall. Nothing's changing. I keep doing the same stupid things. Or I do, is stupider a word? Stupider things, right? I mean, I don't know, but dumber things, whatever. Dumb and Dumber. Yeah, that not the movie, but, Dumb and Dumber. So, but, and, or maybe, maybe you're struggling with a relationship and it looks like it's the end, right? And you're up against this wall because you see, the devil would love to tell you that it's over, that you've messed up one too many times, right? That you've said the wrong thing, you've not said the right thing, whatever it is. He would love to do that to you if he could. There's a painting that hangs in the Louvre. I think we have a picture of it. There it is. Does anybody ever seen this painting before? So it's called Checkmate, right? And the person on your left is the devil. Pretty easy to tell. The other guy's a young man representing all of us, right? The devil would love nothing more than to have us all in checkmate, right? Anybody play chess and know that checkmate means that's the end, right? Yeah, right? I mean, checkmate, it's over. Well, this painting hangs in the Louvre. I do not remember the guy's name, nor could I say it if I did, so you'll have to look that up on your own after church. So it hangs in the Louvre, and this soccer group came through to tour. They had won some tournament, and they were spending some time in the Louvre, and they were going through, and at the end of the tour, the guide noticed that one of the players was gone. Didn't have a clue where he was at, so they went back through, and they found him standing in front of this painting. And he's standing there and looking at it, and the coach is like, hey, we got to go. And he's like, well, I'm a little concerned. I don't understand. And he's like, well, what do you mean? He says, well, it's a great painting. He says, but I don't understand the name. And it's called Checkmate. He's like, well, yeah, but he's not in check. He's not in checkmate. He's got, what? And the guy's like, seriously. So they set a board up, as it is in the picture, showed him, and this kid who had played chess a lot in his life said, the king has one more move. The kid's king has one more move, and he wins the game. All right? The king has one more move in your life. I think the worship team's going to come up, but I want you guys to understand that if you are living and breathing right now, which hopefully all of you are, God has one more move in your life. There is one more thing, and he's asking you today, do you want to be healed from that thing that is paralyzing you right now? Maybe it's your thought pattern. Maybe it's things you watch. Maybe it's things you do. Maybe it's things you haven't done. I don't know. But I know, and I want to instill upon you the hope of when Jesus asks you, do you want to be healed? Be prepared to answer that question because he does have one more move.